In every major crisis throughout history, most people believed there was still time. They were wrong. While they waited for confirmation, a small group had already understood everything. They didn't warn anyone. They simply prepared. Before we continue, I want to know something. Comment below which city and country you're watching this from right now. It matters more than you think. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. What you're about to hear isn't entertainment. It's a pattern, and patterns only work for those who recognize them early. There is a moment in every collapse when the majority still feels safe. The banks are open, the stores are stocked, the officials are calm, everything appears normal. But beneath that surface, something has already broken. The few who understand this don't announce it. They don't debate it. They act. And by the time the rest of the world realizes what happened, the window has closed. This isn't theory. This is how it has always worked. In Rome, in Weimar, in every currency collapse, every bank run, every revolution that seemed to come from nowhere. The crisis doesn't arrive when people panic. It arrives long before that. The panic is just the moment when everyone else finally notices. The difference between those who survive these transitions and those who don't has nothing to do with wealth. It has nothing to do with education. It has everything to do with timing. And timing depends on one thing: the willingness to act before you have permission. Most people wait for permission. They wait for the news to confirm their suspicions. They wait for their neighbors to move first. They wait for an authority to tell them it's real. But by the time authority admits the problem has already consumed everything in its path. History shows us this with perfect clarity. Before every financial collapse, there were people who quietly converted their savings. Before every hyperinflation, there were families who moved their wealth into tangible assets. Before every empire fell, there were merchants who stopped accepting the empire's currency. They didn't do this because they were smarter. They did it because they trusted the pattern more than they trusted the announcement. The pattern is always the same. First, the insiders know. They don't announce what they know. They simply begin behaving differently. They sell when everyone else is buying. They leave when everyone else is arriving. They hedge when everyone else is celebrating. And they do this so quietly that most people never notice until it's over. Then comes the second phase. The informed observers begin to see the signs. Not from official sources, but from behavior. They notice the insiders aren't where they used to be. They notice capital flowing in unexpected directions. They notice small, strange inconsistencies that don't make sense unless something fundamental has changed. These observers don't wait for proof. They move. The third phase is when the media begins to ask questions. By now, the insiders are fully positioned. The observers have already adapted, but the media is still framing everything as debate. Is this real? Could this happen? What do the experts say? This phase can last weeks, months, sometimes years. And during this entire time, the majority remains frozen, waiting for clarity. Clarity never comes before the collapse. It only comes after. The final phase is panic. The announcement, the admission, the moment when authority finally says what the insiders knew all along. And by then, it's not a warning. It's a description of what has already happened. The bank has already failed. The currency has already collapsed. The border has already closed. The majority hears the news and rushes to act. But there's nothing left to act on. If you're still watching, hit the like button. Not because I'm asking, but because you're starting to see it. This pattern doesn't just apply to economies. It applies to everything: social systems, political structures, entire ways of life. Before every major transition, there is a group that understands the old system is ending. They don't fight it. They don't deny it. They position themselves for what comes next. The majority, meanwhile, defends the old system. They argue it's still strong. They point to its history, its stability, its importance. They believe that because something has always been a certain way, it will continue to be that way. But history has no loyalty to tradition. History only responds to underlying forces, and when those forces shift, everything built on the old foundation comes down. Take any empire. In its final decades, the people inside it couldn't imagine a world without it. The infrastructure was still there. The institutions were still functioning. The currency was still accepted. But the foundation had eroded. The military was overextended. The treasury was empty. The legitimacy was gone. And while the average citizen continued to believe in the system's permanence, a small group had already begun operating as if the system had ended. They moved wealth beyond the borders. They built relationships with rising powers. They learned new languages, new skills, new trades. They didn't wait for the collapse to be announced. They simply assumed it was inevitable and acted accordingly. And when the collapse finally came, they were already gone. This is not about predicting the future. This is about recognizing when the present has already changed, even if no one has said so yet. Comment below if you've ever felt like you understood something before it was officially acknowledged. That feeling matters. The reason most people fail to act early is not stupidity. It's social proof. Humans are wired to look to the group for safety. If everyone else is calm, we assume there's no danger. If everyone else is staying, we assume it's safe to stay. This instinct works well in stable environments, but in transitional periods it becomes a trap. The group is always late. The group waits for consensus, and consensus only forms after the outcome is already visible. By the time everyone agrees that something is happening, the opportunity to respond has passed. The few who move early are often criticized. They're called paranoid, overreactive, pessimistic. They're told they're wasting their time, their money, their energy on a problem that doesn't exist. But they don't move early because they're certain. They move early because they understand that the cost of being wrong is smaller than the cost of being late. If you're wrong and you prepared, you lose a little time and resources. If you're right and you didn't prepare, you lose everything. The mathematics are simple, but most people never run the calculation. They operate on emotion, on comfort, on the desire to believe that everything will be fine. And most of the time, everything is fine. But history doesn't care about most of the time. History is defined by the exceptions, the crises, the transitions, the moments when the rules change. And in those moments, the majority is always caught off guard. Not because the signs weren't there, the signs are always there, but because reading the signs requires stepping outside the narrative. And most people cannot afford to step outside the narrative. Their identity, their security, their sense of reality is tied to the narrative being true. So even when the evidence contradicts it, they find ways to explain it away. This is why insiders win. Not because they have better information, but because they're not emotionally attached to the outcome. They don't need the system to survive. They're already positioned for multiple scenarios. They don't hope. They calculate. And when the calculation says move, they move. If you haven't subscribed yet, you're already behind. Do it now. Let's talk about what this looks like in practice. Imagine a financial system that has existed for decades. Everyone uses it. Everyone trusts it. The institutions are massive. The infrastructure is embedded in every transaction. It feels permanent. But beneath the surface, the debt is unsustainable. The currency is being devalued. The trust is eroding. Most people don't notice because the system still functions. The ATMs still work. The direct deposits still arrive. The stock market still opens. But the insiders notice something else. They notice that central banks are behaving strangely. They notice that certain assets are being accumulated quietly. They notice that liquidity is tightening in places it shouldn't. They don't wait for a headline. They adjust. They move a portion of their wealth into harder assets. They reduce exposure to long-term obligations. They increase optionality. They don't do this loudly. They do it quietly, incrementally, in ways that don't trigger attention. And when the crisis finally hits, they're not scrambling. They're watching. The majority, meanwhile, is blindsided. They believed the system was stable because it looked stable. They didn't understand that stability is a lagging indicator. By the time something looks unstable, it has already been unstable for a long time. This is the core lesson. The visible crisis is never the beginning. It's the end of a process that started long before anyone was paying attention. And the people who survive are the ones who started responding to that process before it became visible. You can see this in individual behavior too. Before someone goes bankrupt, there's always a period where their spending exceeds their income. It doesn't feel like a crisis yet. They're still paying their bills. They're still maintaining appearances. But the math has already turned against them. The collapse is already in motion. It just hasn't materialized yet. The people who intervene early, who cut spending, who restructure, who face the problem before it's undeniable, those people recover. The people who wait until the creditors are calling, until the eviction notice arrives, until the account is empty, those people don't. Same pattern, different scale. If you're finding value in this, leave a comment. Let me know you're paying attention. Now, here's the part most people don't want to hear. You can't rely on anyone to warn you. Not the media, not the government, not the institutions, not even the people who know. The people who know have no incentive to warn you. If they warn you and you act, you become their competition. You're bidding on the same assets they want. You're occupying the same safe positions. You're taking up space in the same lifeboats. So they stay quiet. They position themselves. And they let the majority figure it out on their own. By the time the majority figures it out, the people who knew have already taken everything worth taking. This isn't cruelty. This is survival. In a world of limited resources and unlimited risk, information is the ultimate edge, and no one gives away their edge. The media won't warn you either. The media operates on a business model that requires stability. Panic is bad for advertising. Uncertainty is bad for ratings. The media's job is not to inform you early. It's to inform you at the exact moment when the information no longer threatens the system. That's why financial crises are always reported after they've begun. That's why recessions are only acknowledged after months of contraction. That's why warnings are always too late. The system doesn't want early warnings. It wants managed narratives, and the majority consumes those narratives and believes them because the alternative is too uncomfortable. The alternative is that you're on your own, that no one is coming to save you, that the responsibility for your survival is entirely yours. Most people can't handle that, so they outsource their awareness to institutions they trust, and those institutions fail them every single time. But you're still here, which means some part of you already knows this. Subscribe if you haven't yet. This is just the beginning. The question you should be asking yourself is not whether a crisis is coming. Crises are always coming. The question is whether you're the kind of person who waits for permission to respond, or the kind of person who acts on pattern recognition. Because here's what history teaches us. The people who wait for permission never get it in time. Permission is only granted after the danger is undeniable, and by then, the cost of action has multiplied 100-fold. The people who act early don't have certainty. They have probabilistic thinking. They understand that in a world of complex systems, perfect information doesn't exist. You never know for sure. You only know enough. And enough is when the pattern is clear, even if the timeline isn't. They act on enough, and they adjust as new information comes in. They don't bet everything on one outcome. They spread their risk. They stay flexible. They prepare for multiple scenarios. And when one of those scenarios unfolds, they're already in position. This is how wealth is preserved across generations. This is how families survive collapse after collapse, not through luck, through pattern recognition and early action. Let me give you an example that doesn't name names or dates. There was a region where a currency had been stable for many years. People trusted it, businesses used it, savings were kept in it. Then the government began printing more of it to cover obligations. Not dramatically, just steadily. Most people didn't notice. The inflation was small at first, a few percentage points. The media called it temporary. The officials said it was under control, and life continued. But a small group noticed that the printing wasn't stopping. They noticed that the government's promises didn't match its actions. They didn't wait for hyperinflation. They didn't wait for shortages. They didn't wait for the currency to collapse. They converted their savings into assets that couldn't be printed. Land, precious metals, foreign currency. goods with lasting value. And they did this quietly, over months, without fanfare. When the hyperinflation finally came, their wealth was intact. The majority who had waited for official acknowledgement lost everything. Their savings became worthless, their security evaporated, and they had no recourse because by the time the crisis was undeniable, there was nothing left to save. Same story, different country, different era, same outcome. Comment if you see where this is going. The lesson isn't about currency. The lesson is about the gap between reality and acknowledgement. Reality changes first. Acknowledgement comes later. And in that gap, everything is decided. The people who prosper are the ones who live in reality. The people who suffer are the ones who live in acknowledgement. And the distance between those two worlds is often just a matter of months. You don't need insider access to see this. You just need to watch behavior instead of listening to words. When the wealthy start selling, it doesn't matter what they say about the market. When the connected start leaving, it doesn't matter what they say about the city. When the informed start hedging, it doesn't matter what they say about the risk. Behavior is truth. Words are management. And if you learn to read behavior, you'll always be ahead of the narrative. You won't need someone to tell you what's happening. You'll see it yourself. And you'll act while everyone else is still debating whether it's real. This is the edge. Not secret knowledge, just earlier awareness. And earlier awareness comes from one thing: the willingness to trust the pattern more than the announcement. Most people will never develop this. They're too invested in the illusion of control. They want to believe that the authorities know what they're doing, that the system is resilient, that everything will work out, and sometimes it does, but not always. And the times when it doesn't are the times that matter most. Hit subscribe if this resonates. You'll want to see what comes next. So what do you do with this? You don't panic. You don't make reckless moves. You don't abandon everything based on a feeling. But you do start paying attention differently. You stop waiting for the news to tell you what's happening. You start watching the data yourself. You start noticing inconsistencies. You start questioning narratives that don't align with observable behavior. You build optionality. You reduce dependencies. You diversify your exposure. You make yourself more resilient to shocks. Not because you're certain a shock is coming, but because shocks are a permanent feature of complex systems. You stop operating as if the current state of the world is permanent. You start operating as if change is the only constant, and you position yourself accordingly. This doesn't mean living in fear. It means living in awareness. Fear paralyzes. Awareness empowers. And the people who thrive through transitions are the ones who stay aware without becoming paralyzed. They see the pattern. They respect the pattern. They prepare for the pattern. And when the pattern unfolds, they're not surprised. They're ready. And here's the final piece. Once you start seeing this pattern, you can't unsee it. You'll notice it everywhere. In markets, in politics, in social movements, in institutional decay. The same structure repeats endlessly. The insiders move first. The observers move second. The majority moves last. And the majority always pays the highest price. You get to choose which group you're in. Not through intelligence, not through wealth, through timing, through the willingness to act before it's comfortable. Because comfort is the enemy of early action. And early action is the only action that matters. Leave a comment. Tell me which city you're in. Tell me if you've seen this pattern yourself. And subscribe, because this channel is built for the people who are done waiting for permission. The world is always changing. The question is whether you'll change with it or wait until you have no choice.